All right, I think we're gonna go ahead and get rolling here, everybody. So it's 1 o'clock Eastern, and we have all kinds of great content for you today. So first off, my name is Andy Serwich. I'm a technical evangelist with Altero Software, and with me I've got Simon Perriman. How's it going, Simon?
Pretty good, thanks. How you doing?
Good, good. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time to come and talk to us today, share your insights. We actually have a third presenter, Rob Corradini. He's actually having some issues with connectivity where he's at right now. So hopefully we'll see Rob here in a little bit. But Simon and I are going to take it away for now and get us going. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just start with some introductions and some agenda. So what we're going to do here today is mainly talk about Windows Server 2019. So, we did another session on this earlier today, and I kind of had to joke a little bit that every time a new version of Windows Server 2019 comes out, I kind of feel like a kid in the candy store, right? Because every couple of years we get this, this new shiny packaged version of Windows Server with all these great features, and it's always fun to just kind of peel back the layers and see what's there and dig into it. So really looking forward to sharing that information with you all today. So looks like we might have Rob on the call as well. I think he's there anyway. Rob, can you hear me, my friend?
Hello, guys. How are you?
There we go. Good, good.
Here.
The bandwidth gremlins haven't killed you yet, I see.
No, they have not.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, we're happy to have you here. So really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to us today.
I apologize for being fashionably late. Hi, Simon.
Well, I think that was your plan all along. You just wanted to be fashionably late, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, just going over the agenda for the day. So we're going to start with some introductions of myself, Simon, and Rob, and Altero Software, the sponsor of today's webinar. And then we'll also kind of be doing a little bit of an introduction of Windows Server. Going to pass that over to Simon, let him talk about the main themes of Windows Server 2019. And from there, we're going to get into features. We're going to talk about networking and storage. We're going to talk about Hyper-V and clustering, containers on Windows, and then really one of the big heavy hitters of this release, in my opinion, is Windows Admin Center. So Windows Admin Center, great new management tool that we have available to us. Rob is going to be actually doing a demo of that a little bit later in the talk today. And at that point, we're going to wrap up. We'll do some Q&A. I think we have a poll or two lined up, and we'll go from there. So one thing on the Q&A, feel free to use the GoToWebinar questions form throughout the webinar. If we can organically kind of address each question as we go through the slides today, we'll do so. Otherwise, we'll try and address as many as we can at the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Now, we have a pretty full room today. I want to try and make sure we cover as many of those questions as we can, but in case we don't get to all of them, we always do kind of a wrap-up blog post after every webinar that contains a full list of the questions and their associated answers, and you can keep an eye out on altero.com/hyper-v for that information. So other than that, I say let's get going here. So just some quick introductions. Again, my name is Andy Serwich. I am a technical evangelist with Altero Software, the sponsor of today's webinar. I've been in the industry for a while now, 15 years, 15 plus years actually. I have a couple of gray hairs now, but been in the industry for a while. My focus has always been in infrastructure, virtualization, storage, networking, all that type of stuff. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in the cloud and data center management competency, and I am a VMware V expert as well. If you want to connect with me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is right there. Sorry, you'll have to spell my last name. I haven't changed it to Andy Sandwich yet, as some of my friends would like me to do, but I'll get to that eventually. I'm also quite active on the Altero blogs, altero.com/hyper-v/VMware and /MSP-dojo, respectively. With that, I will pass it over to Simon. And Simon, can you tell us all about yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks for the introduction there, Andy. I'm
Yep.
Simon Perriman. Currently, I'm president and founder of FanWide, a sports tech company that manages fan clubs built on Microsoft Azure. Prior to that, I was with Five9 Software, running their business development and marketing teams. And before that, I spent about 8 years at Microsoft. I got to split my time up at Microsoft as a technical evangelist, as well as an engineer, building some of the technologies around Hyper-V, failover clustering, System Center. In fact, some of the technologies I was building 5-6 years ago are now being released in this version. So it's pretty exciting to see things kind of come full cycle. I'm a former Microsoft MVP, and feel free to connect with me at Simon Perriman.
Hey, sounds good. You know, it's got to be interesting. Some of these features that you've worked on previously, now seeing some of them come to fruition. That's got to be a unique perspective on this release specifically.
It has been, you kind of have heard this customer feedback in some cases for a decade, like being able to, move a cluster between domains and whoa, it's finally here. So yeah,
Right.
we'll talk about some of those cool enhancements soon.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Rob, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. My name's Rob Cordini. I am a Microsoft MVP, Cloud and Data Center, like Andy, right? You're still Cloud and Data Center,
I am. Yep.
right? And was also working at Five9 previously. I was a product manager there. Previous to that, I worked for Nutanix, a hyper-converged vendor. And previous to that, I spent 20 years in the field consulting. You can actually reach me at NetWatch on Twitter. Pretty easy to say. You can check out my blog where I write a ton of stuff around Microsoft. I keep myself pretty focused, unlike these guys. Well, at least Andy looks around VMware.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rob.
No worries.
All right, so let's talk about the sponsor of today's webinar. Again, that's Altero Software, the company I work for. Altero is a fast-growing developer of some pretty fantastic, awesome backup software. That backup software is trusted by 40,000 plus customers and 9,000 plus partners. That flagship product is Altero VM Backup. If you're interested in a little bit more information about that, you can go to altero.com/VM-backup for more information. And with that, let's get to the content that you're here to listen about today, and that is Windows Server 2019. So I'm going to pass things over to Simon, and he's going to tell us about the main themes for Windows Server 2019. Simon, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. So I think one of the more interesting things about this release is this really has been the first enterprise release that's been production ready. And what I mean by that is when Windows Server 2016 came out, they went into a new servicing model, the semi-annual model, where about twice a year, they would go and actually release some of these new features. They weren't recommending it for all environments for production in some cases, but a lot of these features now have been out, 1, 2, in some cases 3 years. And so what Microsoft used to find in the past was people would always wait until SP1 before actually going to deploy, the new version. Don't worry about that anymore. This really is kind of the SP1 release. It has actually been out. It's gone through the beta testing, gone through production testing. So I think this will be fairly interesting in adoption because Windows Server 2016 was previously the fastest adopted platform, and people probably expect that this will be even faster. So there's a lot of good things coming out, and Microsoft kind of broke down 4 key themes with this release. First being hybrid cloud, being able to provide connectivity between your on-premise data center up to Microsoft Azure. And so you're going to see that later in this session as we talk about the ability to do migrations, conversions, backup, and being able to do hybrid cloud management through a new technology known as Windows Admin Center. Next area of investment was around application platform, being able to make things easier for developers. And there's really 2 kind of keystone features for that. The first was continuing to enhance containers. And then secondly was making Linux even more of a first-class citizen. So the entire hypervisor and underlying hardware platform has been rewritten to support Linux. So a lot of enhancements that developers are excited about. Next area was around hyperconverged infrastructure, which is really being able to use software-defined data center technology here, not just for the networks, not just for your servers or the storage, but the entire data center. So there's a lot of investment working with hardware partners and really being able to manage things from a single pane of glass. And again, Windows Admin Center, that'll be a great demo showing you some of these different capabilities. And the final big area that Microsoft has focused on and continues to focus on is always around security. Microsoft kind of came with a different approach this time. In the past, Microsoft's security approach was always around, let's protect the perimeter and stop things from coming through. But after doing some studies, they realized that it takes about 2 days for a hacker to break into an enterprise and about 100 days for the enterprise to detect it. So rather than just trying to protect the perimeter, they're now protecting every component, every server, every process, every memory stack, to really try to make this the most secure component ever and reduce things such as ransomware attacks, which have become prevalent. So some of the areas that you're going to hear us talk about are Windows Defender application control. And this basically means that administrators can whitelist applications and policies, nothing else can run. So this is a great way to prevent these malicious attacks. There's also a new enhancement called Control Flow Guard, and this essentially allows any application to only run in specific memory spaces, so it protects against things like buffer overflow attacks. And then Windows Defender, which was previously kind of an add-on that you could go and install, that now comes built into the kernel, built into the product with this advanced threat protection technology. And this is kind of like an intrusion prevention system where not only will it alert you when there's been a malicious exploit found, but it'll actually isolate that code, stop it from running, and stop it from spreading. And all of these are really built on top of a new enhancement, the virtualization-based security, which we'll talk about a little later, where the whole virtualization stack has been further secured. So we're not going to go too deep into security. There's been so many enhancements that could be its own session. But just want to kind of give you the overview of these key themes with this new release, Windows Server 2019.
Sounds good. Thanks, Simon. I think, Rob, we're cutting over to you now to talk about what's new in networking and storage, correct? Oh, you might be muted there.
I
Rob.
was muted.
There we go.
I was actually
All right.
saying this is my favorite part. Yes, networking and storage.
Fun stuff.
All right, let's get rolling. Next slide, sir. There we go. Encrypted subnet. So let's talk about what's new in networking. Specifically, let's talk about security enhancements around SDN or software-defined networking. So encrypted subnets, awesome technology. In the past, you had to do a lot of, we'll say, run around if you actually wanted to encrypted your traffic on at a, we'll say, a LAN level. And now, encrypting traffic is much easier now, so between point A and point B. And this is great for legacy applications. So if you have an old application that doesn't hit certain compliances, this actually will help you bring that application to a certain compliancy because you're actually encrypting it end to end. A next thing is firewall logging. The ability to actually log all this traffic. And really understand what kind of intrusions are happening, et cetera. So, you have this ability to do all this, firewall logging so you can, review this data and then actually take actions on it. And then you also have virtual network peering. One of my favorite features gives you the ability to essentially peer between virtual networks very easily. Traditionally, it's been a little bit of hoops to get that to run, but now you have virtual network peering that actually helps you out do that much more easier. What you're going to see as a common theme is that Microsoft has made it much easier to, onboard into new technologies and even bring your existing technologies into the modern age. Do you have any comments, guys, before I move on to network performance?
No, I really, if I have to pick one of my favorite three in that particular sub list, it's got to be encrypted subnets. Because
Yeah.
Everybody has legacy applications. Everybody has that one application that, despite their best efforts, will not go away. And to me, that encrypted subnets, it's a great technical solution for one of those organizational issues in the IT department, So to me, that's just a great gap filler there.
Absolutely. That's the biggest thing you'll see, and I even see that in a lot of RDP situations where they have legacy apps running in an RDP scenario, and then they needed some kind of encrypted scenario to bring it end to end. That makes sense? Yeah.
Yep.
So let's move on here. Network performance improvements around virtualized workloads. So you have two things. So you have receive segment coalescing and dynamic virtual machine queuing. Now, initially this was virtual machine multi-queue, but now it's dynamic. And what this essentially does is it's actually leveling out CPU. Traditionally, sometimes you have to do a little bit of over provisioning to deal with, especially around large workloads, we'll say, 10 gig, 40 gig, et cetera. And obviously CPU went up at the same time. This actually is in an effort to really, bring down some of that CPU overhead and essentially bringing it in a dynamic manner to be able to balance those loads and CPU. So that actually really helps with, in a nutshell, helps with virtual machines essentially network throughput, so you don't have to really over provision on the CPU side of things. So they've done a lot of great improvements around these essential network performance improvements, but it comes down to is really bringing to the modern age of understanding, having these virtual machines running at, not just at the traditional bandwidth, but 40 gig, et cetera. So let's move to the next slide, Andy.
Yep. There you are, sir.
Awesome. All right, my one of my favorite features on this slide is actually Azure Network Adapter, and I'm going to start out there. And the reason is that it gives you this quick ability to bring a Windows server to connect with Azure on the fly. Traditionally in the past, doing this whole type of connection to Azure, bringing an on-prem SIM into Azure has been traditionally difficult. It's all PowerShell related, so if you're not very familiar getting into those type of setting all that type of stuff up, on top of doing the other stuff on the Azure side of things, this is actually much more easier to really, we'll say, bring that on-premise environment to that cloud, or even connect that on-premise to the cloud. Then you have the easier deployment of SDN. Now, and SDN, again, is software-defined networks. You know, we're still grappling our heads around this, but so SDN, you know, especially when you're dealing with around Windows Server, was really around PowerShell. You had to spend a lot of time around PowerShell to really do it properly. Now Microsoft has come out with a wizard that's on GitHub. It's called the SDN Express. Was I correct on that one, Simon? Or Andy, if you can correct that.
Can't help you on that one.
It's SDN Wizard Express. We'll put it in our show notes or whatever you do here, Andy. But it's a wizard that's up on GitHub, and it essentially allows you to essentially do a wizard approach to configuring your Windows server on SDN. It has a lot of PowerShell scripts, etc. I do want to remind people on the GitHub front is that Microsoft is the largest contributor in GitHub. People do have to be reminded of that. Yeah. And then high performance SDN gateways. This is actually a really cool feature, especially if you're using GRE connections or PPTP connections or something in that nature. Traditionally, they were throttled at lower speeds. I want to say GRE was 2 gigs, 100 megs, but it had lower speeds. And now they've actually brought them into more modern ages, so you can actually have more high performance gateways depending on what you're trying to use, whether it's a, let's say a VPN gateway between corporate networks, or you're doing an IPsec tunnel over the internet, etc. And then you have the LED BAT. That is the acronym. What does the acronym stand for, Andy? I gotta look it up. Write this out.
I forget exactly what it stands for, but basically
it means latency optimized background transport, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And this is all about really optimizing your network your throughput background. So for example, if you're transferring a package in the background of to a Windows desktop, you wouldn't affect that desktop in the foreground. Does that make sense? It's all about really optimizing that backend transport to Windows Server.
Yeah, making our lives as administrators easier.
Exactly. I was looking it up. Yeah, so it's the actual acronym. Oops, I can't even open it now for some reason, but it stands for Legacy Optimized Background Transport. Yep. So awesome. So I kind of flew through that a little bit. But let's actually talk about it a little bit, guys.
Yeah, so I've got the slide here on Azure Network Adapters, and just basically.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, so I put the slide together. It's just a collection of screenshots, starting with this one, and you think about what we've had to do historically to get on-premises workloads attached to Azure. Now with the Azure Network Adapter, you can attach an Azure Network Adapter to any Windows server on-premises and easily and securely attach that server to an Azure virtual network. So it's just like a 4 or 5 step process here. It's really simple. So first thing you do is you open up Windows Admin Center, and Rob's going to be showing this a little bit later. You go to networking, the networking section in the left-hand pane there after you've selected the server that you want to do this for. And then you say, okay, I want to add an Azure Network Adapter. And it brings up this wizard. So here you first have to associate your on-premises Windows Admin Center install with your Azure subscription. So it's kind of an association process you have to go through here. It's really easy and simple. They walk you right through all the steps after you click Register Windows Admin Center to Azure. Go into your Azure account, you grant permission. Very easy, very simple to do. And from there, you go back to Windows Admin Center and your on-premises server, walk through this little wizard on the right-hand pane, and boom, you're connected. I mean, really, you're taking like this layer 3 networking and just making it super easy, getting that workload connected to your virtual network in Azure. It's one of my favorite features of this release, because now I don't have to, really fiddle around with doing this type of stuff in the back end. So at least on the networking side itself, I can stay in the OS and kind of do it from there. One question I'm seeing here, is it kind of like a virtual tunneling interface? Really what it's doing is it's associating kind of like a device to Azure type of VPN is really what it's doing. It's associating that device with, a VPN up into an Azure virtual network. So works very well. I've not seen a single issue with it myself yet. So definitely exciting stuff.
So what are some of the main scenarios? Like, why would someone want to go and, set up this connection?
To me, if you've got like a one-off workload that needs access to some resources you have in Azure, it's really good from that situation. I mean, a lot of organizations that are heavily invested in Azure, they're going to probably have some sort of, site-wide VPN back into that Azure network, right? But I found that this works really well for those branch use cases, those one-off use cases where you just have a single server. Really, it's giving you flexibility. You don't have to do the entire site like you've had to in the past. And to me, that's really the real big use case. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Rob. No, I think Rob might be muted again.
Well, one of the big things, going back to Microsoft's principle of having all this hybrid connectivity, a great example there. I hear some customers say, hey, look, we need to start experimenting with machine learning, artificial intelligence. I don't have the ability to go set that up in my own infrastructure. So just being able to connect your on-premise servers, take advantage of all of those cloud services, this just makes things a lot easier. So you can guarantee that privacy of the connection, yet still take advantage of that scalable cloud services and platforms.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, I'll reemphasize this. If you've been an early adopter of Azure for a while, setting up VPN has been not such a simple activity. And this is like a very easy onboarding with your on-prem infrastructure.
Yep, definitely.
Yep.
All right. You want to talk about storage now, Rob?
Sure. Storage Spaces Direct improvements. So what's new in storage? So a lot of cool things. Storage Spaces Direct is a hyperconverged solution, just to reemphasize, for Microsoft. It's all about basically leveraging, fast storage and slow storage in one mean or a fashion or another. So there's some great improvements around there. There's latency outlier detection. There's true 2-node clusters, which is really cool, because traditionally you need a 3-node cluster to build out an actual storage spaces direct cluster. And this is actually leveraging some of the Azure technologies to do that for a 2-node cluster. This is actually going to be great for SMB. And then you have these, or even we'll say the people that want to build out small clusters for small DevOps projects, etc. You have also mirrored accelerated parity, and then you have capacity increases. You have the ability to really expand that out to, I don't know the exact numbers offhand, but it's in those numbers that you probably would never touch.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've gotten to the point where I don't even mentally take note of it anymore, because I know that it's the Azures of the world that have to worry about those maximums, because they're so high. I know it's in the petabytes now, if I remember correctly.
Exactly, you're right. Yep. And then we have also storage replica enhancements. Storage replica now can use Azure as a replication target. That's currently in beta. That's a really cool thing. There's also some great new SKUs that are intended for SMBs for storage replicas. There's also a 2 terabyte max with 1 partnership and 1 volume. So really cool stuffs around storage replicas. And then other notable enhancements is Azure File Sync, and I think we'll talk about this for a moment here, and then deduplication of REFS volumes. The Azure File Sync is very interesting to me. Andy, you want to talk about it a little bit, or you want to?
Yeah, to me, if I put my engineer hat back on, back when I was, in the trenches fighting the IT fires day to day, Azure File Sync to me really is like, I would prefer to use it over something like DFS. I mean, DFS was great when it came out, right? I mean, it was this amazing thing for, aggregating that file share across multiple locations. But, Azure File Sync is just so much so much more efficient and easy, because now I can leverage, that hot storage on premises, but then
Yep.
still take advantage of the cold storage of a cloud, a cloud storage
Cloud
service like
HCI.
Azure.
That's the best way to call it. I would call it Cloud HCI.
Right, right. No,
File
it's
sync
true.
implies Dropbox. I don't want to say that to Microsoft. But go ahead.
But that was my bit. I
Yeah.
really see it being a nice fit in that space there.
Yep. Absolutely. Let's move on. Unless we
Yeah,
have
definitely.
anything else to chat about.
Talking about the storage migration service next.
Oh, yes, storage migration service. So this is something cool to understand. The storage migration service really helps you on board. I mean, whether you're going to a modern OS, and that's whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. And that's what's really awesome about it. It allows you to really bring unstructured data from anywhere, and I'm saying anywhere, into Azure and modern Windows servers. It's very graphically driven. It does leverage Windows Admin Center. Machines must be domain joined. I'm sure that potentially will change in the future. And the source OS can be as far back as Windows Server 2003. Yes, I did say Server 2003.
People are still using that?
Yeah.
A lot of people are.
I
Yep.
actually spoke to someone earlier today that's still using 2003. I kind
Time
of
to
was,
get off that.
yeah. You're going to notice a lot of school organizations. That's where I've noticed a lot of these organizations that
Yeah.
a lot of the public school systems and stuff of that nature. And then the destination server can be 2012 R2 to 2019. So if you have an application that's not necessarily slated for 2016 or 2019, you can obviously still go to 2012 R2. So it's a really great tool for dealing with all your unstructured data and then essentially migrate it to a modern OS. Especially if you're on a 2003 server, just the fact of being on that server is a security risk.
Yeah.
Just especially if you're doing any kind of internet penetration, you're done. This is not a good idea. So this is a great tool that allows you to bring all that data to a modern OS. It does require some firewall requirements to essentially open some things up, but once you get rolling, it's a very easy process. Great, guys.
Definitely. I've got a slide here that talks about that process a little bit.
Yeah.
I can cover real quick here. So the nice thing about that storage migration service is for the folks that have done vSphere, who are VMware administrators, this process really reminds me of like the P2V utility that we've used on the VMware side for years. You have a source, you have a destination, you do the data copy, and then after you've done that, the destination assumes the identity of the source, right?
Yep.
And it's a very similar process. So here, first we inventory what's on the source server, gather info, gather those configuration files and all that stuff. Then we actually do the data transfer. Once the data transfer is done, the destination assumes the source identity, and the source server kind of enters kind of like a maintenance mode, I guess I would call it, and that the server's still there, there's data still on it, the old copy of the data, and you, the administrator, can go get to it if you need to for some reason, but that new, the destination assumes that persona and handles your production workload at that point. So
of a production, and it essentially brings you as a production file server, whatever it happened to be at the time.
Yep.
What's great is these kind of tools have been around for quite a bit, done by Quest and a number of other products in the past. But I can say right now, having this built in to Windows Server as a native product makes me feel much more better about it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Now, we actually have an interesting question here from Carl. Carl wants to know, are we migrating applications or just migrating the storage here?
Yeah, so it's just the storage from my understanding.
It's just storage.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with applications, anything like registries and anything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you still have to, if there's an application you need to migrate over, you still have to install the application. This service just handles the storage. Yep.
Correct. Yep. Maybe in the future, and I can see this is something progressing potentially down the line, is they would become more application aware. But I could see that happening potentially.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It'd be interesting to see what V2 of this service looks like, because I mean V1 is a knock out of the park by itself. So
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see how this kind of evolves over time.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I think it's time to move on to Hyper-V and clustering. Simon, you want to tell us what's new there?
I will. Great. So one of my favorite areas here. Now, Hyper-V, a lot of the improvements are actually under the hood behind the scenes here, and related to security. So first of all, let's talk about the security improvements and shielded virtual machines. So what is a shielded virtual machine? This is basically a VM which is very well protected, because one of the security vulnerabilities in the past was that if an admin had access to the virtualization host, they could go and export a VM, go and take that virtual hard disk, go mount it on a new server, and then access their tenant's data. And so with 2016, Microsoft introduced this concept of shielded VMs, where essentially there was this key pairing between a VM and a host, and that VM had to run on the host. The data was fully encrypted, so this meant that it really was secure. People couldn't go and move that VM outside the data center to access it. So a lot of improvements have been made from that first version. First of all, that key pairing, the assertion model has been simplified, so it's a lot easier to configure and do the handoff between the VM and the host. There's now a concept called offline mode, which essentially allows you to go and, as you're configuring it, get access to the BIOS, other types of information, giving you better insight. It now supports VM Connect. So when you can directly connect to that VM, the shielded VM, without having to download an RDP file. So that again gives you additional configuration support, PowerShell support. And perhaps the most important one is now supporting Linux with a shielded VM. So if you have a highly virtualized Linux environment, you can make sure that those developers, those other VMs are well protected using these same concepts. Now, the other area is, first of all, enhanced session mode for Linux. Now, enhanced session mode, this gives you the ability to do useful things like being able to copy and paste from your host into your VM, giving access from that VM to your hardware, to other components. So it really kind of connects that VM to your Hyper-V host, making it a lot easier for admins. There's a brand new CPU scheduler as well built in. So traditionally in the older versions of Hyper-V, there was a single CPU scheduler for the entire operating system for every type of server. And it was almost kind of a round robin approach where each of the different VMs would go and schedule a task. That meant that sometimes performance could be slowed down or it was inconsistent. With the new scheduler, it's now been optimized for Hyper-V, giving all VMs fair access to that scheduler. So they should all run at the same rate. And they've added support for storage class memory. So if you're not familiar with storage class memory, this means that your VMs can now run actually in the DSIM slot that's battery powered. It means that they can go a lot faster. So if you kind of think about traditional spinning disks, the next evolution of that was using SSDs. This is kind of the next evolution of that. You're able to run your VMs at ultra fast speeds. And so Hyper-V is now supported from that. Why don't we move along here and let's talk a little bit about the clustering.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
So kind of three big features added to clustering. The first was a request that, as I mentioned, I've heard for over a decade now, being able to move a cluster to a new domain. And so this means, you're migrating, you're consolidating. In the past, you'd actually have to destroy the cluster. You would lose all of its settings and have to go recreate it from scratch. Now there's a way where you can basically, using PowerShell, two-step process. You take that cluster, you join it to a work group, and then you take that same work group cluster and join it to a different domain. So it does allow you to have that flexibility of moving the clusters around. I'm going to skip to the third one here, cluster sets. This is basically clusters of clusters. So what we found in the real world is, even though failover clustering supports 64 nodes, most people don't ever really get their clusters that big. They'll usually use 2, 4, maybe 8 node clusters. They'll use certain sets of hardware, have certain roles, have certain types of hard drives behind them. And so what Microsoft did with this release was it allows you to actually group all of your clusters in the data center together, set up a single management cluster with a single namespace to really allow you to scale out your cluster to, thousands of nodes if you want. So if I wanted to go deploy a new VM, I could say go deploy it to my master cluster. Behind the scenes, it would go figure out which which hosts had the most capacity, are most optimized, and it would go and actually place them there. So it kind of gives you the best practices of still having granular control within each cluster, but gives you the ability to scale out across multiple clusters if you need. And so you can easily live migrate between those different clusters if you want. And let's talk about the third one. If you don't mind going to the next slide, we can talk about it in a little more depth here. But the next enhancement is to what is called cluster quorum.
So for
those of you, yeah, I mean, this has been a big request customers are saying. So for those of you that don't know what cluster quorum is, this is basically the way that cluster nodes, if they get separated, they can't speak to each other, is how they decide who takes ownership of a particular resource. So let's say, for example, you're running a SQL server on a cluster node. The two nodes can't speak to each other. Well, you don't want both of them running that same SQL server right into that same disk, or bad things happen, corruption. So the whole idea behind quorum is only one side will take ownership of a service. And the way they do that is through a voting mechanism. And in this case, what you can use to vote is sometimes another disk. If you have a 3-node cluster, all 3 nodes can vote. But we now see so many 2-node cluster deployments, especially with storage spaces direct, that there needs to be an easy way for these cluster nodes to be able to basically vote on who should own a particular resource. And so if the communication is broken between these cluster nodes, they can actually use voting over a file share, and this is known as a file share witness. And what that basically looks like is you create a file share, both nodes can access it, and within that file share, the cluster will go and create a single file. One of those nodes will open the file, have an open file handle access to it, and if the other one tries to go and open that file, it will see the file is locked. So it will know by going over an SMB connection where that one node has ownership, even if those 2 nodes cannot speak to each other. They're basically using the storage fabric over SMB to communicate who owns, that particular service. Now, I think one of the things that, a lot of people had challenges with is what about if you'll try not to use Active Directory? You use clusters without AD. And in these smaller environments, these branch offices, that became a problem because having a traditional file share with these locks usually meant you had to have AD. So Microsoft's basically simplified it using local domain accounts. Sorry, not local domain, using local user accounts. You can now go create file shares and use that within a cluster so that these nodes can vote, have access to the file share. And if you even wanted, you could go put that file share witness on a USB disk. Go plug that into a storage array. Whichever of those nodes can access the storage, access the file share, they get ownership of that particular role. So this is really going to help out a lot of small customers.
Yeah, let's clarify that. Don't just use a USB you get at a trade show.
Security vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
Actually get one that's rated for, enterprise workloads, right?
Exactly. And they got plenty of those.
That's true. That's right. All right. Yeah, that's a great feature. One of my favorite ones. I definitely want to try that one out myself a little bit more. But for the sake of time, lots of stuff to cover yet. Want to cut over to containers now. So containers, for those that aren't aware, basically it's what I would call and what the industry would call kernel mode virtualization, where you are carving off a dedicated user space specifically for a containerized application. A containerized application lives on top of a container image, and you serve that containerized image up to your network to serve up that workload, right? So the main engine in Windows and Windows Server to deliver containers is Docker. Docker sits underneath the hood and does all the container-related functions. And Microsoft has been investing heavily in containers on Windows Server. And a lot of the work over the last year or two here has been specifically about optimizing and making the various container images smaller and more efficient. So historically we only had 2 of these. We had NanoServer and Server Core, but now they've added a 3rd container image called Windows. Just that's what it's called, is just Windows. Now if I start on the left hand side of the screen here, NanoServer, that container image is designed specifically for born in the cloud applications. If you have an application that you've gotten from a vendor or you've built in-house and you want to serve that up inside of a container and it uses modern day application strategies. It leverages, cloud services. You want to use NanoServer for that. But if I move towards the middle here, the server core image is really probably your best starting place for applications that are in your environment today. If you're an IT pro, you're looking at containers, looking at how they can help you inside of your organization. You want to start moving some applications into containers. Server core is probably the good starting ground because it has support for more applications and it has full .NET framework support baked in. Now, if we go over to the Windows side, that's a larger image. Obviously, it takes longer to boot. There's more stuff contained in it, right? But really, it carries most of the Windows operating system components. And as such, it can support more workloads. So if you have, like a legacy app, something you want to run inside of a container, that might be the container image you want to look at for that. Now, I have this conversation a lot with IT pros, and this always turns into the question of what makes a good candidate to containerize an application. And so I put together what I call my 2019 edition of this particular question. And, I kind of broke it down into 3 areas. What are the easy choices? Which ones are kind of doable? And which ones should you kind of stay away from? So first of all, let's talk about the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit. So the easy stuff is stateless applications, workloads that they start up, they run, they do their job, and then they're done. Containers are fantastic for that use case. Think about things like web apps, IIS, Apache. Those types of workloads are fantastic for containers. Now we move down into the second category there. Now that, historically containers have been more of a dev thing, but IT pros are starting to take notice and they're starting to utilize them for their own uses as well. Now we starting to get into this area where some stateful applications work pretty well in a container because now you can attach persistent storage to containers and use things like the Microsoft Message Service. SQL Server is now supported inside of a container. I believe it has been supported in that manner since SQL Server 2016. So definitely those are some areas that you might want to look at containerizing as well. And then the area where it's really kind of not, it's not working so well yet is down in the infrastructure roles. You don't want to be running Active Directory inside of a container. You don't want to run any of your core infrastructure services inside of a container. You're still looking at a virtual machine for that, right? Yeah. So definitely want to look at a VM for that. Same thing with GUI applications. Containers are intended to be headless. So if your application requires a GUI, better start looking at,
unless it's web-based. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Unless it's web-based, which kind of falls under my web app category there at the top, right? So the other big deal breaker I've seen is if your application depends on an older version of Windows like 2003, 2008, 2008 R2 and does not run on 2016 or 2019, it's not going to be a good fit for a container either because we don't have container images for those older versions of Windows. So with that, what else is new in containers? We've got a couple other things that are notable here. So if you have used containers historically, like I said earlier, you've got Docker locally on Windows Server to handle managing and bringing up containers. But once you start getting out to scale, once you have multiple container hosts, containers in multiple locations, you want to bring in what's called a container orchestrator, something like Kubernetes. Kubernetes is the big container orchestrator on the market today, and they now have Windows Server container support in beta. So that's kind of a big deal.
Kubernetes is awesome.
It is.
From someone that's been doing it for a while, it is awesome.
Yeah, I love Kubernetes. I get excited every time I open up that console. So, but moving on.
It's not a sailing logo, is it? I'm kidding. Go ahead.
And we've derailed.
Sorry, go.
No, you're fine. Then we got Linux and Windows containers, both running on Windows because, the saying today is Microsoft loves Linux. And because of all the open source enhancements and improvements that Microsoft's been making, Linux containers run fantastically on Windows Server as well. And then the kind of the last bit here that I want to mention is we now have the ability to provide access to a host device for a specific container. So if you have a container, you want to present a piece of hardware in the host to that container, you have the ability to do that now, which increases the number of use cases that we have for containers. So that's really exciting. And we also have a container management plugin for Windows Admin Center. And I think, Rob, you're going to show this in your demo here. So
Yes,
I
I am.
won't spend too much time here. So I'm just going to go right over to Windows Admin Center. So Rob, I'll let
Oh,
you
wow.
take that away. And I think you're doing a demo, right?
That's right. Let me get started here.
Yeah.
So quick question that I always hear come up. Project Honolulu, what happened to that? Where did that go? Is this Windows Admin Center?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Project Honolulu was the code name from Windows Admin Center for a really long time. Was it 2 years or so? I
That's
wasn't
wild.
trained.
So fun fact, Microsoft always uses locations as code names, as geographic places cannot be copyrighted or trademarked.
Ah,
I
that's
often wondered
interesting.
about
I never knew that.
Project Kilimanjaro used to be the old name for SQL Server, so yeah, you'll always find the Microsoft code names as some type of city, location, place, mountain,
Oh,
ocean.
wow.
There you go.
I'll
Fun
date
fact.
myself. Code name Chicago.
Nice.
Mhm.
Hey, Rob, real quick before you take this demo away, I just want to let people in the room know we're getting a lot of fantastic questions. Keep them coming. We're going to get to as many of them as we can. We might go a little bit over time today. I want to make sure we have enough time to get to all the content and we at least address some questions. So we might go until 5, maybe 10 after. Just want to let you know. But with that, I'm going to let Rob take it away with Windows Admin Center. Take it away, my friend.
All right, awesome. Does everybody see my screen?
Sure can.
Awesome. So great. This is Windows Admin Center, first view. As you can see here, it's a web-based application, like we've mentioned before. But what's really nice about it is this is really taking over Server Manager, among other tools within this Windows Server ecosystem. In this case, when I open up this Windows Server 2019 machine I have, and this is a VM running on a local cluster I have. Ooh, nice little error on Server Manager. Let me.
You did not make the requisite sacrifices to the demo gods today, did you?
Yeah, I did not. I'm gonna have to refresh this. That's funny because it was running fine before we started, but there it is right there. So let me hit manage as, 1 second to pop in credentials, and we are in. And this will answer one other question. People always ask me, can you do multi-domain management, multi-servers? And as you can see here, in this case, yes, I can, because I can just specify the domains /creds and then actually connect to the box. And as you can see here, I'm connecting right in. So as you can see, first look you get into this, it's going to enumerate essentially all the things that are actually enabled within that Windows server, whether it's running full-blown Windows, if it's running failover cluster manager, whatever it happens to be. All those roles are going to be enumerated here. So you're going to have all that that a lot of those roles that you need on a common basis. Again, you're not going to have all the granular functions that you would typically have through all these different roles you have, like processes, registry, even devices, etc. But you're going to get a good handle on what you can do with a Windows server and managing a Windows server. What's awesome about this Windows Admin Center is it's a multifaceted tool. It's not just server manager. You're doing computer management, obviously, like traditional maybe VDI machines, whatever it happens to be. You got failover cluster management. And then you have Windows hyperconverged cluster management within the interface. That's really awesome. Now, other thing that is awesome about Windows Admin Center is it's extensible. So you have the ability, vendors like a lot of hardware, hyperconverged vendors, storage vendors, and even plugins that you add on after the fact, like for example, the containers plugin that Andy had mentioned previously, these can all be extensively added in after the fact, which is really cool. So it has a lot of extensibility, which I think for someone that, for a company that wants to build maybe a custom, build into the custom API, etc., it's a great way, to jump in. I would definitely classify Windows Admin Center is more of an SMB product than an enterprise product. I still think you're going to need to use, System Center suite of products to manage, large scale environments. But Microsoft's done a great job, essentially, pushing off Server Manager and making Window Manager the de facto way to go. In my vision, I don't see, I would see Server Manager completely going away when, I don't know, another revision or so. I don't know if you would agree with that, Simon, or not.
That's kind of the direction that I'm seeing. What it's really done is consolidated all these consoles, right? Instead of having to open up separate things for services, processes, adding and removing roles, Hyper-V Manager, Cluster Manager, right? We've got them all together. We've got that unified console in place. But I mean, I really do want to emphasize that one point, right? This isn't intended to replace SCVMM. If you are a large enterprise, you have dozens of hosts, you need software-defined networking, dynamic load balancing between workloads, right?
Yep.
You're still going to need that.
Yep.
Or there's other third-party tools out there as well that you can use for centralized data center management. But
Because they're going to be more granular to what we need versus this is more of a broad tool. It's not meant to do all the granular functions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the messaging that I've heard primarily around the question of tool sets is that WAC is going to be a supplemental tool. RSAT's still going to be around. MMC is still going to be around. But I know all the new development, all the new features, all that's happening inside of WAC.
Yeah, I would absolutely see that. And I see RSAT will keep around, but there will be a day that RSAT will go away.
Yep. Agreed.
Everybody has a browser, right?
That's very true. Very true.
And we all know, I think we've all had our own tributes with MMC. So.
Yeah, that's very true. One other key point here, one of my favorite things about this tool is you mentioned it briefly, was the extensibility. Can you show the extensibility screen real quick, Rob?
Sure.
And the nice thing here is third-party vendors can create plugins for this tool, which I think is a big differentiator from if I'm looking at Server Manager. Server Manager couldn't really do that. So I mean, you look at all the different tools that are available today, all these different extensions. So the extensibility to me is really a nice value add.
Now, if you notice here is that each of those functions you saw within me managing Windows Server is actually an extension. I could actually go in here and remove certificate management. So you can see that it's been very granular even at the Microsoft level. So it has a lot of, again, extensibility, which I think is fantastic. The other thing is the connection to Azure. The ability to do a number of ways to connect your on-prem server to Azure, whether you're doing a backup, for example. So you can use Azure Backup, or if you wanted to connect that machine for different things like System Insights. Look at that. Windows Admin Center is not being very nice today. But I will tell you also is that you can also do your patch management on here. Again, it's not meant to do it on scale. You would still use SCCM for that type of product for doing patch management on a scale. But again, you can do essentially all this spot work and all done through a browser. You don't need you need a browser. You won't need, in this day and age, people are not just running Windows. They're running many different types of OSs. I have, a Windows machine. I have a MacBook Air. And you know what? The browser is the common medium and on management, right? And I think having, Windows Admin Center and having this complete web-based management, it's very dynamic, as you can see on the screen. I'm looking at live CPU metrics and memory metrics, etc., Ethernet metrics. It's the way to go, and it's the future.
Definitely.
I hate RSAT, so.
Well, as much as I would love to keep talking about Windows Admin Center, I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So I'm going to cut back to the slide deck here.
Sure.
And can you guys see my screen again?
Yes.
You're good to go.
It says demo.
All right, good deal. So there's a couple of just notable mentions that I wanted to talk about here. There's so much in this release, we didn't have time to cover everything, but there's a couple of key features here I wanted to talk about. We got Windows Subsystem for Linux. If you want to run, command line based Linux applications inside of Windows, be sure to check that out. System Insight, that's another part of Windows Admin Center, but that gives you longer time trend data for performance for your Windows server. Great feature there. We've got some additional password protection enhancements for Active Directory and for domain admin accounts. Features on demand, that's definitely a great feature. That adds some additional support into Windows Server Core so that you can run things like Performance Monitor, Event Viewer, things that we have historically not been able to run inside of Server Core. So if you want some more tools on your Server Core box, definitely take a look at Features on Demand. From there, I wanted to say, let's wrap up with the best part. As of yesterday, I saw the blog post early this morning. 2019 is GA. It's out there. It's available. So if you want to go check it out, it's available on the Evaluation Center. You can go download it today and try it out in your environments if you haven't already. So definitely, that was great news to wake up to this morning. So really excited.
Absolutely. I actually saw it right after you liked it on Twitter there.
Oh yeah. So you follow me on Twitter. That's good to know. I'm that's glad to know I'm not speaking into a vacuum. Anyway, I digress. So let's just do some wrap up here. A couple of housekeeping items. We do have another Windows Server 2019 webinar coming up in November. I'll kind of be running with the ball on that one. It's going to focus on SMBs and SMEs. It's going to be very demo heavy, and certainly looking forward to some feedback from you, the audience, on what kind of demos you want to see. We're going to put up a poll here shortly in the Q&A section where you can kind of vote on which features you want to see specifically, which ones you want to see demoed. And I know with my luck that you're going to choose the hardest ones to set up a demo for, but that's okay. I look forward to the challenge. From there, we also have to announce that we have some new forums coming. So historically, we've always run some 3 blogs here at Altera. We have a Hyper-V blog, a VMware blog, and a MSP-focused blog. Now we're starting to build some forums around that, trying to foster some more community discussion. Going to have a URL, and that's going to be available very soon. So looking forward to that. Now with that, I'm going to give Rob and Simon a chance to kind of look through the questions. I'm going to give you, the audience, a chance to get your last questions in. I'm going to talk about Altera VM Backup here for a slide or two while those guys get a chance to look at the questions, and we start getting some answers out to you shortly after that. So again, I mentioned earlier, Altera, we make a backup application. That's Altera VM Backup. We focus on 4 main areas. First, efficient backup. It's got to be super easy to use, really easy to set up. So we really focusing on that. But at the same time, we also focus on giving you full control of your backups. We want to make sure that you have the features you need and the advanced features you need as well, so we don't pull any punches there. I have nothing but good things to say about our support team. That's been a focus of our organization since day one. So we have a fantastic support team. And just talking about some of the latest developments, we can back up directly to Azure storage accounts, which I'll show you here in just a second. We have continuous data protection backup models where you can get as low as 5-minute RTO. And pretty soon we're going to be releasing replication, and by year end, support for Windows Server 2019. So with that, also a quick mention about our MSP program. If you're MSP or service provider, we have a very full-featured, super easy to use and fantastic. That's a lot of acronyms there, adjectives, going back to English class here. Anyway, we have a great MSP program. So if you want to use our application at a pay per VM per month type of model, we have the ability to do that. And a quick demo here. So I'll give the guys just a few more minutes to look at the questions. So we're talking about cloud and hybrid cloud as part of this conversation. I just want to show how easy it is to connect to an Azure storage account using our application. So if I come over here to backup locations, and over here on the right hand side, I've got my offsite locations. You can see I already have an Azure storage account here that I'm utilizing for offsite backups. If I want to add a new one, or I don't have one already, I can go in here and I can say cloud backup to an Azure storage account, click next, and there's one field, a single field that you need to fill out. You have to have an Azure storage account set up, and if you don't know how to do that, we have a link right here on exactly how to do that. At the end of that process, you'll get a connection string. It's just a long UID basically. You paste that in here, and we will automatically connect to that Azure storage account and start throwing backups at it. So it's very easy to use, super quick to set up, and start leveraging Azure today for your backup storage. So with that, I am going to cut back to the slide deck, and we'll get to some questions here. So gents, I'll pass it over to you guys. Have you seen any questions that you want to address before I start looking through the list?
Yeah, one that's come up, I guess, 2 or 3 times is about cross-cluster migrations. So I have one cluster, I have a second cluster. Can I move a VM between them? How easy does that look? Well, unfortunately, it's not quite as easy as just drag and drop, move in between. But since Windows Server 2012 R2, there has been a technology that's actually allowed you to move between clusters, known as shared nothing live migration. And what this will do is it will actually take the underlying virtual hard disk, migrate it without downtime, then take that virtual machine, live migrate it between hosts without downtime. So yeah, that capability is available. It's still not as seamless or as clean as, you know, maybe some vCenter admins would like to see it, compared to the experience that you get there. But yeah, that is around and that is supported.
All right, good deal. Real quick, I want to announce that we've got one of the polls up, we're going to be putting that up here in just a second. So keep an eye out for that. We're going to put the poll up. Oh, there it goes. So go ahead and fill out the poll there if you're interested. Definitely would like to get your feedback and your thoughts. I think we'll have another one coming up here in a second, but while that poll's going on, do you guys have another question you want to touch on real quick?
There's one here, and I'm not sure if Andy or one of you can answer this. When will Server 2019 be available on Azure Images? I wasn't sure when that's available. Is that available today? I haven't looked.
I know that the technical preview was available in Azure Images. I'm not sure when the GA is going to be showing up. I would be surprised.
There's usually a bit of a delay.
Yeah, I mean, I can't
got
see
to
it
do
being
some
that
extensive testing, but the goal is, of course, to get it out there as soon as possible. So yeah, great question there. But they don't give us the insight. Suddenly it will just appear.
Yep. So keep checking back, basically.
I got another one that's come up a couple of times as well. Is there going to be a System Center 2019? And the answer to that is yes, there will be. So even though Microsoft has been focused a lot more on, you know, developing new technologies in the cloud, System Center is still around. They've announced that the general availability for SC19 will be sometime in the first half of next year. No more specific date has been announced, but basically the major enhancements that you're going to see around that kind of mirror what you see with this release of Windows Server. You know, hyper-converged infrastructure, better security, better Azure connections, and you'll see it also be able to do some great things with containers, as well as supporting and lighting up all the features of Windows Server 2019.
Sounds good. Sounds good. There's two questions that I've seen come up a few times here that I want to address. And the first one is about the Azure Network Adapter. So we spent a little time talking about that. And the question really came down to, with the Azure Network Adapter, are you connecting the entire site or just a specific server? And the answer there is just a specific server. You can certainly do a site to Azure VPN connection if you want to, but the Azure Network Adapter is designed specifically to make it easy to connect an individual server to Azure. So a little bit more of a granular use case there, but yeah, definitely both are options. So the other question I wanted to address, and I lost it here in just a second. Oh yeah, have a lot of people asking whether we are recording this webinar or whether the slides will be available at a later time. The answer to that question is yes to both. We will post a recording of the webinar, and we will also post a link where you can download the slides as well. So with that, do you guys have any others you want to address before I start going through the list?
I do have one more here. Can I manage Windows Admin Center over the public internet?
Okay.
Yes, yes, yes to the above. It's a website, right?
Yeah.
So you're hitting it, as long as you expose the proper ports, put the proper permissions on, you're good to go. And I kind of follow on to that a little bit is, and I'll reemphasize it, can 2019 be managed without a browser? Because I did get a lot of a couple of questions asking, you know, that people feeling that browsers aren't the stablest things in the world, and we did an example of that with trying to hit that. And yes, you can still use RSAT tools. So.
Sounds good. I got a couple here about containers. Had a couple of questions where people saying they don't, you know, they haven't been able to fully wrap their heads around containers yet, or the concept of containers, and definitely, you know, I can speak to that a little bit because it is a mental shift from what we've done before with virtual machines, and even before that, physical computing. But I think really where containers stem from is the fact that when you take on-premises today virtual machines and what we've done for the last 15 years and try to apply it to a cloud model, just, you know, plop it right down on top of a public cloud, it's not the most efficient use of that cloud infrastructure, right? And I think that's that's part of where the containers methodology comes from. We want to be as efficient as possible with the resources that are available to us. And you know, I had Ben Armstrong, who is the lead PM on the Microsoft virtualization team. I had him on for a webinar back in May, I think. May or March, I don't remember exactly which. But the question came up about density of workloads that are containerized versus workloads that are virtual, you know, running in VMs on top of a host. And the density for containers was vastly over and above what you could do with virtual machines, because the container is so much smaller.
Yes, you don't, the footprint, the resource requirements, etc. You can fit tons. I mean,
oh yeah, definitely.
Personally at home, I run 90% of my home infrastructure on containers. That's as much I love it. But
yeah, so I think it is a mental shift there. If I go back to the question, you know, how do you wrap your head around that? And really, what it comes down to is you need to go do some reading. You need to go check out what the container, what the Docker model is all about. I've got some blogs out in the Altero blogs. I think we have one on our Hyper-V blog, and I'm also right in the middle of a series on our MSP blog, which is altero.com/MSP-dojo, where I talk about containers from a service provider perspective. And I think it was 2 weeks ago, I put up kind of the introductory, you know, part 1 of that series. So definitely check that out. I covered kind of the why of containers and what they are, and touched on the logical architecture of containers and where they fit. So be sure to take a look at that. Also, Microsoft has a fantastic repository of container documentation out on docs.microsoft.com. Or Docker actually has a bunch of documents on their website as well.
Or GitHub, where I get most of my stuff.
Yeah. GitHub is a wealth of information as well. So
I can't tell you how much I can say, especially if you have limited resources. I have a home lab. Containers allow me to stack up a lot of stuff.
Well, yeah, definitely. Because I mean, you think about virtual machines. I mean, you know, if you go back before containers, how many instances of Windows Server were running inside of your data center, you know?
Yeah,
with
true.
The same type of memory utilization, you know, all the same processes running. And I mean, containers is really designed to address that. I mean, look at the nano server container image. I was talking to Ben, I mentioned Ben Armstrong. Back in May, I actually talked to him last week at Ignite, and he was telling me that in their own testing, they've got nano server images that are booting in less than 3 seconds. I mean, that's crazy. I mean,
are they on storage class hardware that Simon's spoken about?
I what kind of hardware, but I mean, 94 megs contain for the container image. I mean, I believe it, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right.
So,
and I actually have seen a lot of other hyper-converged vendors have a very similar footprint like that, and that's how they get their performances.
Right, definitely. So, Rob, for our last question, I just saw a question pop up here from somebody in the chat.
Sure.
Can you give an example of something specific that you are running in a container? And I know you've got some containers running over.
Oh God, something fun. And Simon will laugh. I have a Plex movie server that runs completely in a Windows container, and I think all my friends that use my Plex know that it's actually pretty high performing.
Nice.
So that's one thing that I do that's on the fun side. On other sides, I actually run different applications. I have invoicing apps that run in containers that you don't have to essentially dedicate a VM to. So I'll run, many containers inside of a VM. So, and I'm running, containers of Linux containers and Windows containers. Now, be aware, not all containers will run on all things. People do have to be aware of that. Containers are specific to OSs.
Right. So,
yeah.
All right, with that, I want to put the poll results up really quick. I think we're going to go ahead and get that up. So just in case you're curious, we've got the poll results up there. So definitely, we're going to take that feedback when we start preparing for our November webinar. And I'm going to take that feedback and use that to kind of fashion which demos that we're going to show as part of that webinar. So if you want to see kind of a more hands-on look at Windows Server 2019, be sure to keep an eye out for that webinar. We'd love to have you there. With that, I think we are we're at time there, gents. I want to say thanks for taking the time to come and talk to us today. I feel like this has just been a conversation that we would have at a conference somewhere over a couple of beers, right? So it's been great talking to you guys
Yes.
during the webinar today. Really appreciate you being here.
And thanks for all of
Awesome
our
being here.
attendees for spending an hour with us today. We appreciate that too. Hopefully you guys are ready to check out Windows Server 2019.
Definitely. So again, thanks you guys, and thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you.
Yep, and we're looking forward to having you for another Altero sponsored webinar in the future. So again, thanks for watching.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.